Welcome everyone to our panel discussion on digitizing financial services for inclusion. Let's start by introducing our moderator, Mr. Jaspreet Singh, Regional Technical Specialist, Digital Finance and Innovation, United Nations Capital Development Fund. Welcome, sir. And now I would like to introduce our panelists, Mr. Suresh Sethi, MD and CEO Designate, NSDL, eGov Infrastructure, Mr. Ketan Doshi, Managing Director, PayPoint, Mr. Naveen Chhawa, CEO, ID Sign, and Mr. Shailesh Paul, VP and Head of Merchant Sales and Solutions, India and South Asia, Visa. Over to you, Mr. Singh.
Thank you so much, Aparna. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone joining us from far corners of the world. Uh, and I think as Aparna basically alluded to the title of this session, we're going to talk of two broader perspectives. One is certainly on inclusion, and then inclusion through financial services where digital is playing a big enabling role in different ways. And I think it's an apt topic for different reasons. One, as a world, we have progressed big time, especially in terms of ramping our foundations to drive financial services to the last mile, almost adding 1.2 billion people since last decade through bank account and wallets. And I think that demonstrates that, we have been able to reach to a greater extent people who were kind of left out in different ways. But then the broader question kind of still eludes us today is that account or wallet for what? You know, what did the account, giving an account to a person tell us about how a person, family, or a community in a country has been able to navigate their financial lives? Or for that matter, withstand financial shock, much less the financial shock associated with a public health crisis like COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw people losing jobs, not able to meet their basic needs and expenses. So as we think of finance that works for the people at last mile, we see that the financial inclusion unfortunately tends to be reduced to binaries as opposed to a discussion of a spectrum. The today's session, the idea would be to explore this spectrum more broadly and what are the building blocks of making this spectrum work, especially in context of digitize as we think of digitizing financial services, how does it really end up including people or excluding people in a way? We'll also look at unpacking the adoption drivers and that too beyond payments and look at what are the challenges to overcome as we think of creating value for customers. And I think it's kind of will be a small statement to say that the pandemic has certainly exposed the vulnerabilities that we as human beings have and how our systems basically operate and work. But certainly it has also kind of shown some shining light in in terms of how digital could enable possibilities that was completely out of rather people are working towards it, but it took a little while to kind of work on progressively developing it. Be it reaching payments to last mile in a quick matter of seconds, or getting micro merchants to move from offline to online. The distinguished panelists that we have today would help us, explore broadly this entire agenda of discussion over next 37 odd minutes. I'd like to start with someone, who has been at the forefront of both developing the foundational rails of digitizing financial services uh, in his previous work. And now as he kind of take up a new role with NSDL, I really to bring some Mr. Suresh Sethi into a conversation uh, with, asking really about his views and what are the factors that he thinks is making up to this broader discussion on digitizing of financial services and what needs to be done further to scale up this across the broad spectrum of services beyond just payments. Mr. Sethi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jaspreet. I think very appropriately put. And if we look at the topic, we are talking about digital services for inclusion. So let me start by talking about the this entire. If we primarily look at it, we are talking about a journey which started almost a decade ago. We are talking about a fact that almost 10 years ago, we set forth on the path to create a national digital identity. This became a cornerstone for a lot of the stuff that we are talking about today. So, a national digital identity at scale, which today is covering the entire population, became the starting point. Further to that, there was a huge focus given to creating access. So during the period from 2014 onwards, under the PMJDY scheme, we were able to provide access and accounts and bring people into the formal financial economy and banking. And we brought almost 360 million people into that. As a consequence, today when we look at it and we talk about the divide between the banked and the underbanked, we are talking about almost 80% of the adult population having a bank account. Now, that is not enough. As you rightly said, it's not just about opening an account. It was equally critical that people have the ability to operate these accounts. And that is where the next part of the jigsaw fell in place when we look at our payment systems today. I think, if we look at the comparison between both the developed and the developing world, I think we've probably got some of the best payment and settlement systems. And the interoperability of these systems have been the hallmark in which the design has been put forth. Now, these interoperable payment systems are today having a participation from both the public sector, the banks, and the private sector. So you are getting the best of all worlds. The big tech is playing on the same rails. At the same time, the banks are also providing products over there. So that was, again, a very key essence. And this translated, goes without saying, into the India stack. That was, again, a key essence of bringing people in to be able to just not have accounts, but to have operating accounts in which they can move their funds back and forth. So these were the basic pillars of inclusion. And if we see the stakeholders or the primary enablers who have brought this together, the regulator, the government, the public and private enterprise, the technology companies, I think they have converged beautifully to bring it to where it is today. I would actually like to quote a BIS data report, which actually spoke about the fact that in terms of inclusion, what India has been able to achieve in 10 years would, in a matter of fact, would have taken almost a 46-year cycle to achieve in terms of the numbers as we speak today. So I think this has been a great achievement at creating this sort of infrastructure. Other equally important part to the infrastructure, I think, which naturally in today's terms is also playing a very important role, is the ability to create the infrastructure where people can have a physical access to these facilities. And here I'm talking about the fact that with something like Aadhaar and a payment settlement system like AEPS, we've been able to actually deploy the right technology for people to get doorstep banking services. And I'm just not, even referring to the assignment which I did with India Post Payment Bank, where we actually enabled almost a force of 190,000 Dakias with a simple smartphone and a biometric device to be able to reach the doorstep of various villages and provide banking services, a complete suite of banking services. This workforce, in a matter of speaking, has been able to increase the rural banking infrastructure by almost 2.5 times. So what we have seen during this pandemic, that when the government today running on these rails has been able to put money directly into the accounts of the people as required, the people have been actually able to get access to these funds, even with the Dakia walking to their house and being able to provide them services where they can do cash withdrawal right from their account in the convenience of their home. So that is something which has been there, which I think are the building blocks and the enablers in which we have been able to this ecosystem. The last 12 periods, we've actually been in a scenario where we have found that we are today able to provide more digital services than cash withdrawals. That is what has happened over the last 2 months during this pandemic. So then let us see how this has been able to address the challenges now. Now, very clearly, if we see 80% plus of the Indian workforce works in the informal sector. Now, this is a workforce which is the driving engine of the economy, and they are working in various areas, including in the MSME sector, where clearly they need to have the ability to keep the services going. And digital has been at the forefront in rescuing and re-enacting these supply chains whether it is for looking at the physical supply chain of delivery of goods and therefore the procurement cycle, or it is the supply chain of paying for these goods and services and consuming them digitally. So this entire ecosystem has come forth very well. So what I think has been clearly addressed for us on the back of these guardrails has been a universal access, which was already there. And therefore, a pandemic at the scale that we are going through has been suitably addressed because people were already part of the financial ecosystem. And therefore, you were able to reach out funding to them and create credit wherever required to jumpstart the economy. Similarly, as far as supply chains are concerned, disruption has been to an extent limited or mitigated by creating the nice payment and settlement systems functioning and creating the interoperability in the payment and settlement systems. And I think our fintechs and the fintech platforms have played a very significant role in building business models on top of it and creating partnerships in which they have been able to provide their services. So I will like to end over here by putting a complexion to this on these lines and put it back to you for the next question.
No, thank you so much, Mr. Sethi. I think that was really a helpful perspective, especially as we think of how, from an inclusion agenda, how financial services have been serving the market over last 3 or 4 decades. We used to talk of supply side driven agenda where microfinances were at the at the helm of addressing the last mile and the inclusion issues. Then it kind of turned over to the infrastructure, which became the forefront of creating that foundation or building that foundation, leading up to where we stand today with, some millions and billions of accounts. But I think the broader question kind of, still hangs out over there. Where do we go from, here in terms of beyond accounts, right? How does all of this translate into a more resilient life for an individual or a household? And I think this is where when we think of a world which is going to work towards building back better in post-COVID scenario, the entire focus at some point of time would have to shift to customers end of the day, right? And what are the customer use cases that we should be focusing on, which will allow people to have short-term saving or be able to better manage their monies in different ways. I think it's kind of conversation where that's kind of already starting at different peripheries across the world, but obviously it needs to kind of still build the momentum which it needs to have. And I think it's at this point of time, I'd also like to bring someone who has been in the industry for long at the forefront of driving the infrastructure rails, and also trying to work with the fire service providers, especially in terms of delivering services that are apt to the last mile needs. Mr. Salesh Paul, and I think Salesh, the question to you really is, what's your take on the missing pieces of puzzle that even Mr. Sethi alluded to that are yet to be addressed? Are we creating enough use cases or business models that could reach the last mile? Or are we still dragged by the legacy system and approaches in our thinking of, should we really serve people at the last mile or not in that way? What would be the vision of success for you that look like when it comes to digitalization of financial services in that space? Kailesh, over to you.
Thank you, Jaspreet. It's very good to be here, and I think fantastic setup. So thank you for that. I'd like to actually introduce the seller side of the ecosystem. To your question of what's the missing link, I think the missing link is the seller side ecosystem because it's the seller side that actually provides the bridge to inclusion. So let's dive into that a little bit further. We've got 63 odd million MSMEs in India. Very much they're the lifeblood of the economy, right? They employ 120 million people. They contribute about 30% of the GDP, and of course, the government's ambition is that will increase to about 50%. So that seller ecosystem is also where the income generation arises first. So for us to include more and more individuals into the formal financial system, into the digital ecosystem, it's really important to be there where they're actually creating that income generation, because then that will have the positive ripple effect of creating much wider inclusion. Now, if you look at the progress that we've made so far, actually it's been reasonably modest. Right? We've done pretty well when it comes to creating credentials for customers be it bank accounts or UPI handles or debit cards and credit cards. As a country, we've done pretty well in providing those credentials to a very large number of our population. But if you look at the merchant side of things, we haven't done that well. Out of the 63 odd million MSMEs that I just talked about, 2/3 of them have no access to payment services. That's a pretty staggering number. It's about 20 million at best have access to any form of digital payments. That leaves the rest of the 43 million with no access to these payment systems. We think it's actually critical for us to provide those access solutions to these MSMEs. Now, how do we do that? It's actually not that simple, right? And how do you do that in the light of a pandemic? It's if you just think about what's happening with the pandemic, the customers have actually had a marked shift. Customers now want to pay remotely, they want to pay digitally, they want to use hygienic and safe and convenient payment instruments, which is all very good. In fact, that's a positive development. But if you look at it from the small merchant's perspective, they don't have access to the technology, they don't have access to the logistics, they don't have all of what makes large businesses competitive. They don't have access to that. So, as an industry, what we need to do is we need to unite around the small merchant and provide them that access. And that will come in various different ways. Firstly, in terms of enabling technologies that allow smaller merchants to actually use infrastructure that they might already have. So, take the mobile phone. A mobile phone, a smartphone is capable to a very large measure of presenting a QR code. A small merchant's mobile phone can actually mostly phones are NFC enabled, can in fact double up as an acceptance device. You can tap your phone, you can tap a customer's phone or your card on that device. It can provide you your kata, it can provide you a whole bunch of other value-added services. So here's a technology where a merchant can remotely access an app, create for themselves the ability to become an acceptor of digital payments and do the business in the way that their customers now want to do business with them. And I think that's really critical. The RBI has most recently announced the creation of a payment infrastructure development fund, which we again think is a very positive development. What that will enable is a large, significant amount of funding will be made available that will then be used to create the kind of infrastructure that we're talking about. The RBI is putting a sizable investment of its own. Other industry players like ourselves and banks will also be contributing to that fund. What we hope that will do is it'll create support for what is typically a less profitable part of the business. The economics on this part of the business are really lean. So that will encourage more and more distribution of these payment types. If that all works well, we actually think so. Today, there are about 5 to 6 million card acceptance points in the country. The bold vision is that that will increase to about 30 million in the next few years when all of the industry gathers itself around these solutions. And then once that happens, then we've gone from a fairly small number of a third to more than half of the MSMEs in India will finally have access to digital payments. So
thanks so much for that, Salesh. I think while I fully agree with you on different dimensions of it, that there's an opportunity with a specific segment around MSMEs, and what we are doing to incentivize the infrastructure development. But I think the one question that kind of still keep on haunting us is, are we doing enough product development or developing solutions or use cases which are still resoluting to the needs of the users that we're going to talk of, right? And obviously, as MSME, as you rightly pointed out, is a big one to tackle as we think over a period of time. And I think I'll come back to this question of user-centric product development again toward end of the session. But before and for all we know that we spoke of, we know that inclusion is a big agenda. Digital is obviously an important enabling part of it. But as I kind of still keep on recalling one line from a cartoonist, Luke MacLeod, which he captured in his blog. He said that it's not what the software does, it's what the user does. And technology is neutral for all we know. And even during COVID, this is kind of very well understood that while we see surge in payments or usage to a greater degree, it varies across the segments and customer classes that we are intending to tackle from an inclusion perspective. I'd like to bring Naveen into this conversation, who has been through his work, been looking at technology from different aspects. And what I'd like to really, ask you, Naveen, is do you think the way services and experiences are designed and delivered in the context of financial services today, it is addressing the needs of a complicated market like India, where different degree of readiness exists with different segments? Could you share some learnings from your own experience and work? And what are some of the things to really focus on, as we think of digitization of financial services for this broad market segment called India?
Sure, and thanks, Jasprit ji, Suresh ji, and Shailesh ji for your thoughts. Very happy to be part of this discussion. First, just so that we get to the basics of what is expected of digitization of financial services for inclusion, the need is for the weaker sections of the society, who we can call the unbanked, to be part of the financial system. There is a lot of lack of access to financial services, not only that it stifles the human potential, job creation is and also impedes economic growth and perpetuates the whole cycle of poverty. In turn, digitization is key to accelerating the impact of financial inclusion and boosting our economy through all classes of people engaged in the digital economy. And we are all engaged as part of the digital economy. Inclusion will give these sections get financial education as well as access to funds, schemes, policies which can help them elevate themselves by increasing their productivity, their incomes, and savings also. So today, if you were to segment the whole the society, the unbanked society is the small roadside businesses, the laborers, the small farmers, and women. Empowering them by using new technology can move them from being unbanked to becoming financially inclusive to uplift their financial independence as well as self-sustenance, right? So the keywords here are technology and unbanked. So the need, as rightly is the design, is to design products, services, or other interventions that better address poverty-related issues and also assess, track, monitor their performance and effectiveness also. So that is what we should be looking at. So to answer the question on do we have the experience to design and deliver the needs of Digital India for inclusion? Yes, we have the right expertise and we have seen many of those coming in, right? So digital wallets have been a great success after demonetization. Paytm, Airtel Money, M-Paisa, Jio Money, etc., where people are able to both receive and send money without a need for bank account. And there is higher ease of transactions also today, if you were to answer. To answer the question on the willingness to deliver for the needs of the Indian market, I would say honestly the answer is no, because there are almost 6.2 lakh villages in India where majority of the folks still deal with cash, and less than 50% of them are in the financial inclusion radar, right? So, and Indian banks, only 50% of them have branches in rural areas, and most of them are not available for this low savings population. And if you were to look at the other side of startups which have mushroomed, they always can deliver very good new technology, but they concentrate on the urban population because it's the low-hanging fruit, and they want to always, and they cannot look at this segment, which is the the cost-sensitive and can only offer low profitability. But we also lack the larger vision of scale, which is all India about, because this segment is cost-sensitive and offers and also has helped the growth of many digital products in India. So the era of mobile proliferation in India is driving as well as the underbanked towards access to financial products. So investment in technology in this space requires a lot of funds, because if you were to look at investment, people will always look at ROI, and the money can come from the scale of the marginalized section where they open high return, very low deposits for their savings, or taking insurances, or bringing in new initiatives like organizing the traditional kitty party money, which helps the small groups of people finance their education or for emergency medical needs or setting up small businesses, right? But this is all the short-term indirect savings, and there's a lot of play in the long term as well for any businesses or startups to play. And welfare schemes today can also be incorporated as part of this, and will give authenticity and reduce the pilferage also. So the other examples of digitization that can help the masses are crowdfunding, which we have not seen a lot in India currently. Small savings deposits like 10 rupees, cashless agricultural loans, financial training, etc. And countries have seen great growth and improvement through e-money enablement, and also up to 5% GDP improvement with these mobile financial services.
Right. Thanks, Naveen. I think I'll also have to, be mindful of the time because we have to take the Q&A as well. No, I think I fully agree with a lot of things. I think it kind of resonated with what, Mr. Suresh and Salesh already had broadly outlined for us. And when we think of, technology nuggets, especially in context of building for markets across India, I think some of the things that we still need to kind of still look at, that how broadly is the technology useful for that customer who's supposed to use it. End of the day, I was told a story of a fintech, in Malaysia, who was in Malaysia and Indonesia at the same time, and they said that when they started in Malaysia, it became very successful for them, and when they went to Indonesia, it kind of completely bombed, failed out. And the reason they found was that in Malaysia, people swipe left to right, whereas in Indonesia, people swipe right to left. Okay. And that small difference was all it that kind of, make that technology go flat, or that product kind of, didn't kind of well went in the market. So I think it kind of goes through a whole sort of other issues that, that we could obviously keep on talking about. But in interest of time, I'd like to, pick up one other part of this conversation, which is more towards, yes, digital is important, and we need to build financial services on the digital rails, which can be enabled through technology. But all we have seen is, and we also spoken about that in different languages. Per se, we talked about infrastructure, but there's a human interaction element in that infrastructure, which is still a critical part of driving this journey to adoption. And to some extent, it boils down to the experience that a customer receives when interacting with the service that will define that to what extent would they be willing to continue using it. Ketan, with your work that you've been doing in this space, and knowing that there are still miles to go when it comes to improving the last mile delivery or distribution network, what do you think we are doing enough, and where should the focus be? Ketan?
Yeah, Jaspreet. Yeah, Jaspreet. Thanks for giving me. I'll pick up where Naveen had stopped. Uh, what? Let me go back and explain you where we are coming from. We are offering and services 48,000 touch points across the country. Now, these touch points are primarily in semi-rural and rural locations. So, around 70% of India is residing there. 70 plus 14, 4% of India is residing there. Uh, what we have seen and where we are coming from, we are seeing people walking 3 to 4 kilometers just to withdraw money, just to access an ATM service. So this is, and we are talking about financial services or financial inclusion. So we are actually in the first phase of financial inclusion, if you ask me. Uh, we have just completed in our first phase payments. We are enabling, I mean, we have enabled payments across India through various modes, through QR codes or wallets or UPI, whatever you say. And again, banking, as Surejji said, it was post Jandan and post Pradhan Mantri's push. We were at that point around 55% of India was banked. I mean, 55% of family were under banking system. Right now, after that push, it is around 99%. So it is just uh, in a matter of say around 4 or 5 years, we could see that 50% of the financial inclusion, that is just focusing towards banking, because banking and payments is the entry point right now. At the end of, and I can tell you, we are completely ready for getting into the second phase. I see lending and insurance coming in a big way. We are all ready because our infrastructure in terms of jam, Jandan, Aadhaar, and mobile is completely ready. Our phones NPCI is ready with many products, many innovative products. We are seeing digital lending taking catching up very fast, and I'm is going to now being experimented at the rural locations, and BC points can make a very big breakthrough in getting this low cost ticket size in place. uh, Primarily, the problem in financial inclusion, if you ask me, is the ticket size is very low, and because of a low ticket size, the margins are very low. So you need a strong operating system which brings efficiency. I mean, technology is enabling us to get efficiency in the system. So if I have to collect an EMI of 500 rupees, is it viable was it viable rather? Now getting, I mean, systems like us or service providers like us are making it easy, are giving easy access to the customer to drop 500 rupees EMI. So that was previously not available. Now India is ready for the second phase of financial inclusion. We will see loans picking up at rural location, and with this government special, I mean, they have special guarantee schemes which needs to be run at this small merchants at small rural locations. So we need a strong distribution pipe, which is efficient, which can deliver last mile, which can also, I mean, if you ask me, we need ease of understanding a product. So product needs to be very simple, ease of accessing a customer, ease of onboarding a customer. We can ease of servicing. So this ease is uh, is the key for a financial inclusion. And I think India is ready for it, and we are creating small sachet products. We are creating and even this virus has helped us in bringing efficiency quickly rather than cashbacks and all, which is now in history. And efficiency, all of a sudden, in last 4 months, we have seen across the tech, which is catching up. So
Right.
an efficient distribution model is required, and I think we are on it. Second phase, we'll see big time financial inclusion on lending piece. Insurance again is going to be a long game. I think it is a 10 years piece. But small ticket size insurance, if you ask me, PMJJBY, APY, and PSBY, all these things have picked up. I mean, if you ask me data, last 3 months we have done a ticket size of 11 rupees of around 2 lakh customers in pandemic. So for 11 rupees product, the margins are as low as 1 rupee.
Right. No, I think Ketan, thank you so much for that perspective, and I fully agree with you that we have come a long way in this journey, but I do kind of ditto this point that we still have miles to go. We cannot rest. At this point of time where we can just kind of sit on our laurels and say that we have some million of accounts and we're all done with inclusion, because possibly it's not impactful. That's a very broader question. I think in interest of time, I'd like to really pick up on some of the questions that users have been sending out, and we just have 7 flat minutes to go with. So the first question is for you, Mr. Suresh Sethi. It is that a big part of digitizing financial services involves training and promoting digital literacy. How are governments, tech players, and financial institutions collaborating for this? Yes,
Jaspreet,
Ketan, if you want to
my
really take.
point, yeah. So I fully align with the point that is being made over here. So it is not just financial literacy, because one is about telling people what insurance can do for them, how it can secure the future, how investment products are important. Equally important is digital literacy, because today, as we are moving towards digital, we've seen, right from the days when the mobile wallet started, people's ability to just hand over money and assume that it's moving from mobile to mobile in a digital form was something that people were not willing to put their trust into. So these two factors would become very important. Clearly, the government is putting investment into it, because
Yeah.
even as a government organization at India Post Payment Bank, we actually invested in training more than 250,000 postmen and postal employees to provide financial services. So there is a lot of investment coming. There are otherwise entities like National Skill Development Council. There are government funds which have been created, which are providing this necessary thrust. But it is very much an integral part of this entire digitization and using digital for inclusion. This is an equally important pillar, and a lot of focus has to go into it.
Sure. No, that's really helpful. And I think before I kind of really pick up one more question from the list of questions provided, I'd like to just put a question to all of you basically. What will be your single top advice that you would like to provide these financial service providers to focus on? These could be banks or fintech looking to move beyond payments. If you can just give a 30-second answers to this, possibly that will also allow us to cover the different Q&A that are kind of coming through in the chat box.
Okay, I can start. This is Naveen. So the advice for technology is to focus on lending, which is the need of the hour. Because the money access through phone wallets, being able to use the wallets for business starts, education or medical emergencies, farming needs, farmers being able to reach and sell their produce directly or whatever the creation from, say, handicrafts or articrafts directly to the end user. Other aspect to think about rural India is also that many of them cannot read or write. So even if they have a smartphone or a simple phone, they can't do much transaction. So I really think the voice-based recognition solution is much needed there. And the last one I would like to point out is still basic literacy on financial systems and what is available is the one thing that will really help women self-groups, small businesses, farmers, etc., to be self-sustained.
All right. Thanks so much, Naveen. Sailesh, do you have a point on that?
Yes, I think so. If you look at one aspect that is the big enabler, it's to invest in open loop interoperable platforms. It has multiple benefits. One person's innovation can benefit somebody else's customer. It leads to more innovation. The scale and it lowers the cost of developing these solutions for all of our stakeholders. So there's one advice I could give is that we should invest in these open loop platforms, make those solutions interoperable. That'll be highly beneficial.
Point well taken. I think need of the hour actually. Mr. Suthi, any advice that you would like to put forth to the budding fintech
I
out
think
there?
part Naveen and Sailesh, but I would definitely say that whatever solutions are being put forth, they should have a universal sort of application. By that, I mean that we do talk about systems which have been deployed at scale, but whatever products and services we are building, it should make sure that they are technology agnostic to the extent that they cover the Bharat and the India population at the same time. And that is where the larger ecosystem will get addressed.
Thanks so much. Ketan, any last word from you?
So it needs to be more collaborative effort with banks, large service providers like insurance companies. Operation is quite high, and if they partner with fintech, and they need to be more open in partnering with fintechs, which are more nimble and the cost of operations are very low. So then only the financial inclusion can proliferate across the country, and it would be a success story.
Oh, thank you so much. I think broadly, you have all covered all different aspects of the spectrum as we think of the financial services and how the inclusion really interacts. And Ketan, you rightly pointed out that we're the first stage of inclusion, and we still have a long way to go on this. And I think while we can continue a long conversation and have multiple areas to discuss through in this broader agenda of digitization, but I think in the interest of time, we'll also have to give the floor back to our host. But thank you so much, all of you, to basically take your time out and helping us canvas through with your own work that you've done in the space, and help us understand how we need to be looking at digitizing financial services for the last mile or from a inclusion perspective, where customer should be at the center of this discussion, and as we move from infrastructure to customer, what that journey could look like possibly. So thank you again so much, everyone. And with that, I would like to hand over the floor back to our host of the session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I would just like to conclude the session by thanking all of our speakers for being here with us today. It was an amazing session that happened just right now. Thank you so much. and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.